The first thing you need to understand is that Veilcos didn't come here to feel anything. He came here to end things. That's what commanders do. They plan. They execute. They move on to the next system and they don't look back because looking back costs time, and time in warfare is the one currency nobody ever has enough of. He'd been doing this for 43 standard cycles. 43 years, if you want to put it in terms a human would understand. He'd cracked open 17 planetary shells. He'd watched suns go dark. He'd stood on bridges made of polished titanium alloys while his fleet stretched behind him like a black ribbon across the stars, and he had never once hesitated. Not once, until the morning he arrived at Earth. I'm going to tell you this the way I saw it, because I was there. Not as a soldier, not as a strategist. I was there because I was stupid enough to volunteer for the Observation Corps, which is exactly what it sounds like, humans who agreed to be embedded with our own planetary defense grid when the Galactic Authority first made contact with Earth 6 years ago. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I was standing in the observation deck of the Meridian Station, which hangs about 40,000 kilometers above North America, and I watched the whole thing unfold in real time through about 11 different sensor feeds. And I'm telling you, nothing that happened that day made sense until the very end. Then it made all the sense in the world. It was a Tuesday. I remember that specifically because Sergeant Acaffer had just brought a box of powdered donuts to the station break room, and we were arguing about whether powdered donuts counted as breakfast food. And then every single alarm on the station went off simultaneously, and the donuts ended up on the floor, and nobody thought about them again for about 16 hours. The long-range sensors lit up like a Christmas tree. Not one ship, not a patrol fleet, not even a standard invasion cluster, which the briefings had warned us about 12 to 20 vessels operating in triangulated formation. This was a command armada. 47 ships, and that's just the ones we could count. The sensor technician, a woman named Priya whose last name I could never pronounce correctly, went completely pale. She had these reading glasses she always pushed up on her nose when she was nervous. She pushed them up about 6 times in 10 seconds. 47 confirmed, she said, and the signal profile on the lead vessel, she stopped, swallowed. That's a Veth-class command carrier. Nobody in the room spoke. A Veth-class command carrier is the kind of ship that doesn't show up unless someone is very serious about what they're about to do. We knew what it meant. We'd all read the briefings. We'd all sat through the Galactic Authority liaison sessions, the dry presentations about fleet classifications and engagement protocols, and what various formations meant in terms of intent. A Veth-class command carrier meant the being inside it had the authority to order planetary dissolution. Planetary dissolution, those are soft words for something that isn't soft at all. I remember standing there, staring at the sensor readouts, and thinking completely randomly about my mother's kitchen. The smell of it in the morning, toast and coffee, and the sound of the radio playing something low. I thought about it for about 3 seconds, and then I shoved it aside and started doing my job because there was nothing else to do. The fleet dropped out of hyperspace at 6:14 hours, Eastern Standard Time. The sky above the North Atlantic didn't change. You wouldn't have seen anything from the ground, not with the naked eye. But on our sensors, it was like someone had switched on 47 new stars in the space of a single breath, and every one of them was pointed directly at us. The lead ship, the Veth-class carrier, was called the Ethon Meridian. That's the translation, anyway. The actual Vethani designation is a sound you'd have to rewire your throat to produce. The Ethon Meridian was approximately 4 kilometers long, which sounds impossible until you see it on a visual feed, and you realize, no, actually, that's exactly what impossible looks like. It was shaped like a spine. Like someone had taken the vertebrae of some ancient creature and strung them together in a long, curved line, and each segment was bristling with weapons emplacements and engine clusters and sensor arrays. And at the heart of it, in a command chamber that our intelligence reports described as a room made entirely of dark glass and cold light, sat Veilcos. I didn't know his name yet. I learned it later. At that moment, all I knew was what the Galactic Authority liaison had told us when we'd first gotten the long-range warning signal 48 hours earlier, that whoever was in that ship was not a diplomat, not a traitor, not a cultural ambassador. He was a closer. That was the word they used, a closer. Someone who arrives at the end of negotiations that nobody had actually been holding and makes things final. Here's what I know about Veilcos now, having spent a lot of time going through the records that were eventually shared with us after everything changed. He was born on a world called Veth Prime, which orbits a binary star system about 900 light-years from Earth. The Vethani are, and I'm going to describe this as clearly as I can, tall, about 8 feet on average. Their skin is a deep charcoal gray, almost black in low light, and it has a faint bioluminescent quality that pulses with their emotional state, though they've evolved to suppress that almost completely in public. Their eyes are large. The iris is a pale silver that catches light in a way that makes them look like they're always watching something slightly beyond whatever you're actually showing them. They are also, depending on who you ask, either the most disciplined military civilization in this arm of the galaxy or the most brutal. Those two things are not mutually exclusive, and Veilcos was both. He'd risen through the Vethani Fleet Authority the way a blade rises through water smoothly, and leaving nothing undisturbed behind him. 43 years of service, 37 successful planetary subjugations. He was, by every metric the Galactic Authority used, one of the most accomplished military commanders currently operating in known space. He was also, according to a single small notation buried deep in his personnel file, and I mean buried, like someone had tried to hide it even from themselves, a father. His daughter's name in the Vethani tongue, translated roughly to something like brightness through clouds. We'll come back to her. The Ethon Meridian opened communications at 6:31 hours. Not with our military, not with our governments, with the Meridian Station directly, which told us immediately that whoever was doing their intelligence work for the Vethani fleet was doing it very, very well. Because the Meridian Station wasn't supposed to exist on any public record. It was a joint human galactic authority project, partially funded through 17 different shell entities to keep it off any commercial sensor registry. And yet the hailing signal came through our exact frequency, addressed to our exact call sign, as if whoever sent it had our internal directory. I was standing at the secondary comms console when it came in. Commander Reyes, our station commander, a compact woman with gray-streaked hair and the kind of stillness that comes from having made a lot of hard decisions, looked at the signal for about 2 seconds and then looked at me. "Open it," she said. I opened it. The visual feed took a moment to resolve. Then the dark glass room on the Ethon Meridian filled our main screen, and we saw him for the first time. Veilcos. He was seated in a command chair that was clearly designed for a body much larger than anything human. He was in full tactical configuration, which meant he was wearing what the Vethani call battle weave, a kind of adaptive composite armor that shifts its density based on perceived threat. It was dark, almost the same color as his skin, except for the command insignia running along the collar and cuffs in a pale, cold blue. His eyes found the camera immediately. Those pale silver irises. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at us for a long moment, the way you might look at something small and unfamiliar that you haven't decided what to do with yet. Then he spoke. The translator algorithm rendered it in flat, clean English. "Humans of this station," he said, "you will transmit my message to your world governments. The Vethani Fleet Authority, acting under Galactic Compact Provision 7, is initiating a formal assessment of this system. You have 24 of your hours to produce documentation of territorial sovereign compliance. Failure to produce said documentation will initiate standard reclamation protocols." Reyes kept her face completely neutral. "Standard reclamation protocols?" she repeated. "Correct." A pause. "Can you define what that means exactly?" she asked. "For the record." Veilcos looked at her the way a person might look at a particularly unremarkable piece of furniture. "It means," he said, "that your world will be catalogued, cleared, and reassigned." "Cleared?" He said it the way you'd say swept or filed, like something administrative, like something that happened in an office somewhere with very little fuss. I felt my hands go cold. Commander Reyes nodded slowly, as though he'd just given her a mildly inconvenient schedule update. "Understood," she said. "We'll be in touch." She closed the channel. The room was absolutely silent for about 4 seconds. Then Lieutenant Ockheffer, who Who I mentioned earlier, the one with the donuts, who is also one of our tactical analysts, said very quietly, "Well, that's not good." And somehow that broke it, because half the room laughed and the other half looked like they were going to be sick. And everyone went back to their consoles and started working, because that's the only thing you can do when you're staring at the end of everything. You work. The first 18 hours were almost ordinary, in the way that only catastrophically dangerous situations can be almost ordinary. The fleet held position. They didn't advance. They didn't fire. They waited with a patience that felt, honestly, more threatening than aggression would have been, because aggression you can respond to. Patience just makes you sit there and stew in your own fear until you can't think straight anymore. Our governments, all of them, simultaneously, which was historically unprecedented, convened an emergency session. The Galactic Authority liaison, a being called Sarathvel who looked vaguely like a very tall person made mostly of sand and old wood, arrived at the station within 3 hours and spent most of the next 12 making calls we weren't allowed to listen to. The planetary defense systems went to full activation. Not that we were optimistic about what that meant against a Vethani command armada. Our defense grid had been designed to handle a moderate-scale hostile incursion. It had not been designed to handle 47 ships anchored by a vessel that could, according to our technical analysis, crack the Earth's upper mantle if it felt like it. But you do what you can. And meanwhile, down on the surface, the world just kept going. Which sounds surreal, but most people didn't know yet. The governments were sitting on the announcement, waiting until they had something more to say than we might all die by tomorrow morning. So regular people were waking up, making coffee, taking their kids to school, sitting in traffic, doing all the things you do on a Tuesday when you don't know it might be your last one. I thought about that a lot during those 18 hours. I thought about all that ordinary life just happening, down below us, completely unaware. I thought about my mother's kitchen again. At hour 19, something happened that wasn't in any briefing document. The Ethan Meridian launched a single shuttle. Not a weapons platform, not a scout drone. A shuttle. Small, lightly powered, running on a standard atmospheric entry profile. It wasn't even using a military approach vector. It was using the same kind of low-disturbance entry trajectory that Galactic Authority diplomatic craft used when they didn't want to alarm the locals. "What is that?" Ray said. Priya was already on it. "Single occupant. The biosignature is..." She frowned deeply, pushed her glasses up. "Commander, the biosignature is Vethani, but it's small. It's very small. Like significantly below average Vethani mass." "How small?" A pause. "Small enough that it might be a child." The room went quiet again. "Where is it heading?" Reyes asked. Priya traced the trajectory on her display, overlaid it against a ground map. "Vermont," she said. "A town called Harwick Falls." Another pause. "Population, 1,200. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Reyes said, "Get me everything we have on Harwick Falls, Vermont, and someone call the local field office. I'm going to stop the station perspective for a moment and tell you what was happening on the ground." I learned most of this afterward, from reports and testimony, and the recordings that the local Galactic Authority observer, a small, fussy creature named Borvith who kept meticulous notes on everything, had been keeping in the town for the past 6 months. Harwick Falls is the kind of small town that shows up in paintings. Old white houses with green shutters, a main street with a diner and a post office and a hardware store, a covered bridge over a creek that runs fast and cold in October, mountains in the distance that turn orange and gold in the fall, and in July, the particular deep green that doesn't exist anywhere outside of northern Vermont. 6 months earlier, a Vethani civilian, registered with the Galactic Authority under a cultural exchange provision, had settled quietly in Harwick Falls. Her registered name was a sound the locals couldn't replicate, so she'd asked them to call her Vera. She was, by Vethani standards, young, very young, about equivalent to a 15 or 16-year-old human, though the Vethani developmental timeline doesn't map cleanly onto ours. She had the charcoal gray skin and the pale silver eyes and the 8-foot frame that marked her as Vethani, but she'd arrived with the kind of gentle, slightly uncertain energy that teenagers of any species seem to carry. That combination of wanting to be noticed and wanting desperately not to be. She'd moved into a small apartment above a bookshop. Enrolled in the informal community education program, the town had started after the Galactic Authority's first cultural exchange guidelines were published, and gotten very quiet about herself. And then, over 6 months, Harwick Falls had done what small towns sometimes do. It had just absorbed her. Not perfectly, not without awkward moments. There had been a week in February when someone left an anonymous note on her door that was unkind, and she hadn't come out for 3 days, and the bookshop owner, a 62-year-old woman named Ruth who was deeply religious and deeply pragmatic in roughly equal measure, had brought soup and sat on the floor outside her door and talked at her through it until Vera opened up. And Ruth never mentioned the note again, but she started checking the door every morning after that. There was a group of kids her age, human kids, 16 and 17, who had initially treated her the way you treat something alien, which means with a rotating combination of wonder and wariness and occasional cruelty. But over time, the way it sometimes goes, the cruelty faded and the wonder became something more like normal, and 3 or 4 of them had become genuinely close to her. She was by all accounts kind, a little formal in the Vethani way. She learned human cultural references with an intensity that was almost academic. She made actual notes about idioms and kept a running list of movies she'd watched so she could talk about them at school. She helped an elderly man named Carl carry his groceries every Thursday because he had trouble with the steep part of his driveway, and she could carry everything in one trip. She learned to play guitar badly, and she practiced on the fire escape above the bookshop on warm evenings, and the people in the street below had gone from complaining to sort of looking forward to it. She called herself Vera Koss. Koss, her father's name. She'd been using that name for 6 months, and nobody on the Meridian station, nobody in our entire intelligence apparatus, had connected it to the Vethani fleet commander until Priya pulled the biosignature match and cross-referenced it against the Cultural Exchange Registry at hour 19. And then everything made a terrible, strange kind of sense. Because Vale Koss had not simply arrived at Earth with a fleet and an ultimatum. He had arrived at Earth with a fleet and an ultimatum and a daughter who had gone rogue 6 months earlier, who had filed a cultural exchange application under a provision that technically gave her adult status in Galactic Authority law, who had come to this tiny town in Vermont and planted herself here so thoroughly that she'd become part of it. And he hadn't known where she was until she'd told him. According to Borvith's meticulous notes, and I really cannot overstate how useful that small, fussy creature's paperwork turned out to be, Vera had sent her father a message through an encrypted Vethani channel approximately 46 hours before the fleet arrived. We eventually got a translated transcript of it. It read, "Father, I know you're coming. I know why. Before you do what you're going to do, I need you to come here first. Not with the fleet, just you, just come and see. I'm at the diner on the main street. I'll be having breakfast. Come at 700 local time. Come and see what you'd be destroying, and then make your choice. Your daughter, who loves you and is furious at you in equal measure. I'll tell you what it looked like from space. At 6:43, the single shuttle reached the upper atmosphere and began its descent. We watched it on the sensor feeds. It moved slowly, carefully, like someone who was not entirely certain they were doing the right thing but was doing it anyway. At 6:59, it landed in a field on the edge of Harwick Falls. A farmer named Bill Tanner was in that field, doing something to a fence post, and he later described watching a Vethani shuttle settle into his clover like a very large, very quiet insect, and thinking that he should probably call someone, but then thinking that he was going to see what happened next first. The hatch opened. Vale Koss stepped out. He was still in his battle weave, fully armored, command insignia and all. He looked, Bill Tanner later said, like someone had turned a mountain into a person and given it a very bad morning. He stood in the clover field for a moment. The early morning light of Vermont in July fell across him, gold and clear and completely indifferent to the fact that the most dangerous military commander in this arm of the galaxy was standing in a field in his armor at 7 in the morning. He looked up at the mountains. He looked at the covered bridge over the creek. He looked at the main street of Harwick Falls, visible in the middle distance, quiet and ordinary in the early morning, a few cars moving, the lights on in the diner. And then he started walking toward it. Part 2, the diner on Main Street. Sally Merritt had been running the Harwick Falls diner for 22 years, and she was not. She would later tell anyone who asked, easily surprised. She'd had 4 presidents come through for photo ops. She'd survived 2 recessions and 1 fire, and a visit from a travel blogger who described her coffee as aggressively mediocre, which had bothered her for reasons she couldn't entirely articulate. She'd been one of the first business owners in Harwick Falls to welcome Vera when she arrived in January, because Sally's philosophy was that anyone who came in looking hungry deserved to eat, and the specifics of their biology were secondary to that. Vera had a standing order. Every Tuesday and Thursday morning, 700, she came in with whichever of her friends felt like joining her, and she ordered the same thing. Short stack, extra butter, maple syrup, the real kind local from a farm 3 miles up the road. Orange juice. Black coffee, which she'd taken to with an enthusiasm that Sally found both touching and slightly alarming. That Tuesday morning, Vera came in at 6:58 with 2 of her human friends, a girl named Maya, 17, who wanted to study environmental science, and a boy named James, 16, who was going through a phase where he wore his older brother's flannel shirts and thought it made him look grown up. They slid into the corner booth, the same one they always took. Sally brought coffee without being asked. Vera wrapped her large gray hands around the mug and stared at the door. "You okay?" Maya asked. "I'm fine," Vera said. In 6 months, she'd gotten the rhythms of conversational English down well enough that she almost always sounded natural. Almost. But that morning there was something underneath the words, something tight and held back, like a string pulled to the edge of its tension. "You don't seem fine," James said, with the directness of a 16-year-old. "I'm expecting someone," Vera said. "Who?" She looked down at her coffee. The bioluminescence under her skin, that faint, suppressed pulse, flickered once. "My father." Maya and James exchanged a look. They knew a little about Vera's family situation. Not everything, but enough. Enough to understand that "my father is coming" was not a simple sentence. "Is that good?" Maya asked carefully. Vera thought about it for a genuine moment. "I don't know," she said. "I think it might be both." Sally brought the pancakes. Short stack, extra butter, real maple syrup. She set them down in front of Vera and was about to head back to the counter when the diner door opened. The bell above it rang, and Veilkas walked in. Sally described the moment afterward, and I want to use her exact words because no paraphrase does them justice. "He had to turn sideways to get through the door," she said. "And then he straightened up and he was enormous, you know. I knew Vera was tall, but she seemed normal after a while because she was just Vera. But this man, he was in armor, full armor. Like something out of a movie, except it wasn't like a movie at all. It was just real and immediate, and he was standing in my diner between the counter and the coat rack, and he was looking around the room with those silver eyes, and everyone had gone completely quiet. There were 7 other people in the diner that morning. A retired couple named Frank and Dorothy, who came every Tuesday for the egg special. 2 construction workers nursing coffee before a shift. A teenage girl doing homework. The town librarian, a man named George who read the newspaper in the back corner every morning for 30 years without variation. None of them moved. Veilkas scanned the room. He found Vera. He stood there for a moment, looking at her across the length of the small diner, and something moved through the bioluminescence under his skin, just a flicker quickly suppressed. But Vera saw it. She had been watching him from the moment he walked in. "Hi, Dad," she said. The words were quiet, just 2 words. But in that small room, in that absolute silence, they landed like something immense and simple. Veilkas crossed the diner in 4 steps. He stopped at the edge of the booth. He looked down at his daughter, with her stack of pancakes in front of her and her coffee mug in her hands, and her 2 human friends sitting there looking up at him like they'd forgotten how to breathe. He looked at the pancakes for a long moment. Then he said, in the Vethani tongue, and Vera later translated this for us, "You are eating the processed grains of this world." "They're called pancakes," Vera said. "You are eating them voluntarily." "I like them." A pause. "They are sweet," he said, as if this was an indictment. "They're very sweet," Vera agreed. "Sit down, Dad." He looked at the booth. It was a regular diner booth, designed for human bodies, and the idea of Veilkas fitting into it was physically challenging. He looked at Vera. He looked at the booth again. Then, with the careful deliberateness of someone who has never in their life done something undignified, and was about to, he folded himself into the seat across from her. His knees hit the underside of the table immediately. He shifted, tried again, settled into a posture that was clearly uncomfortable, and said absolutely nothing about it, which was, Vera later told us, the most Vethani thing he could possibly have done. Sally appeared at the table side. She was holding her order pad and her pen, and she had the particular expression she got when she was making a decision. "Coffee," she said. Vale Koss looked at her. "It is a hot liquid derived from roasted plant seeds," Sally said, in the same tone she used with tourists who weren't sure about the maple latte. Something almost happened to Vale Koss's expression. "Yes," he said. Sally poured him coffee, nodded once, and went back to the counter, where she immediately told Frank and Dorothy in a low voice that they should stay seated because this was going to be something. And Frank and Dorothy, both in their 70s and long past the point of being frightened by anything life threw at them, agreed. Here's the thing about the scene that followed. I've read Borvith's record of it. I've watched the security camera footage from the diner, which was subpoenaed, and then quietly become the most watched piece of video among the Galactic Authority Diplomatic Corps for about a year. I've talked to Maya and James and Sally and Ruth, and eventually to Vera herself. And every account agrees on one thing. It started as an argument. Not a quiet argument, a real one. The kind where voices go low and controlled because they're too big for the space, and because there are people watching, but the control is thin, and you can hear what's underneath it. Vale Koss had come because his daughter asked him to come. That said something about him, even if he didn't know it yet. But he hadn't come to change his mind. He'd come because he was Vale Koss, and Vale Koss completed what he started, which meant finishing this conversation before finishing the mission. That was how he framed it, Vera said, finishing this conversation, as if she was an item on a tactical checklist. She told us later that the framing made her furious in a way that was almost clarifying. "You came," she said, "because you thought this would take an hour and then you'd feel like you'd done your duty." He didn't deny it. "I came," he said, "because you are my daughter and you asked me to. And the fleet. The fleet has orders." "Your orders?" "Correct." Vera put her fork down. Meyer and James, to their credit, stayed in the booth. They told us later that they'd thought about leaving, that it would have been the logical thing to do, but they'd both had the same instinct, that leaving Vera alone in this felt wrong. So they stayed and they were quiet and they held their coffee mugs and they witnessed. "Do you know," Vera said, "what I've been doing for 6 months?" "I have the observer's reports," he said. He looked at James and Maya briefly. "You have been socializing with the juveniles of this species. You have been consuming their food. You have been participating in their cultural education systems. You have been—" he paused, the faintest possible hesitation, "playing a stringed instrument on a fire escape." Maya made a sound that she later described as the most accidentally timed laugh of my life. Vera didn't look at her. She kept her eyes on her father. "Say it in a way that means something," she said. He met her gaze, the pale silver of his eyes in the morning light. "You have been living here," he said. "Yes. Among them. Yes. As if I belong here," she tilted her head. "Is that the sentence you're having trouble finishing? I want to stop here and tell you something about Vethani biology that matters for understanding what happened next. The bioluminescent pulse under a Vethani's skin is, as I mentioned, almost entirely suppressed in public life. It's culturally equivalent to, say, crying in public among humans in certain cultures. Not impossible, not without precedent, but something you work very hard to prevent because it reveals the interior of you in a way that you haven't chosen to reveal. High-ranking Vethani, like military commanders, have the most extreme suppression. Vale Koss had, by all accounts, not shown visible bioluminescence in any recorded public appearance in 30 years. The footage from the diner shows, very clearly, that at approximately 7:18 hours, as Vera said the words "as if I belong here," a pulse of pale gold light moved through the skin of Vale Koss's hands and forearms. He looked down at it. It was the first crack. He didn't speak for a moment. He looked at his hands, at the light moving under the charcoal of his skin, And then he looked up at Vera, who was watching him with an expression that was part challenge and part something much softer. "The Galactic Compact," he said more quietly, "does not recognize this system as a protected." "I know what the compact says," she interrupted. "I read it. I read the whole thing. I know the provisions they're using. I also know there's an exception clause in Provision 7 that specifically addresses systems with documented cultural exchange registrations. I filed the right forms, Dad, 6 months ago. I filed them specifically because I knew. I knew you were coming. I've known for over a year." He stared at her. "You filed the forms," he repeated. "I filed all the forms," she said. "And then I came here and I lived here and I made sure that the cultural exchange was real and documented and witnessed. And the forms are on record with the Galactic Authority, and Borvith, that small creature that lives in the grocery store, the furry one, has been documenting everything I do for 6 months. Everything. Because I asked him to, because I needed a record." Veilkas was silent. Vera leaned forward slightly. "You cannot dissolve a system with an active, documented, registered cultural exchange under Provision 7's exception clause," she said. "You know that. You know the law better than anyone. That's why they gave you the fleet, because you don't make mistakes with the law." She held his gaze. "I didn't make a mistake either." The gold light pulsed again under his skin. "You used the law," he said almost to himself, "against the fleet." "I used the law for the planet," she said. "There's a difference." James, who was 16 and wearing his brother's flannel shirt, and had approximately no business being this close to a conversation that was effectively determining the fate of the Earth, leaned over to Maya and whispered, in a voice that was not as quiet as he thought it was, "Did she just lawyer her way out of an alien invasion?" Vera didn't look at him, but her mouth moved, just a fraction. Veilkas noticed. He looked at James, really looked at him for the first time. This boy in his oversized shirt, sitting in a diner booth, holding a coffee mug with both hands, who had the nerve to still be sitting here having witnessed a conversation that most military envoys would have found paralyzing. He looked at Maya, who was watching him with a steady, unafraid curiosity that reminded him, and this is from something he said later to Vera that she shared of the young officers who survived their first campaigns, the ones who went quiet instead of loud, the ones who watched. He looked at the diner, at the egg special on Frank and Dorothy's table, at the librarian in the corner who had folded his newspaper and was watching the whole scene with the alert attention of someone who knows they're watching something they'll want to remember. At Sally, behind the counter, who was pouring coffee into cups she didn't need to refill, yet because it was the thing to do with your hands when you were pretending not to watch something. He looked at the mountains through the window. That Vermont green, deep and specific and old. He picked up his coffee cup. He held it for a moment, looked at it. The dark liquid, the steam curling up in the morning light. Then he drank it. Sally told me afterward that she gripped the counter with both hands when he did that, because she'd been worried about the coffee, whether he could even drink it, whether it would be good for him, whether she should have said something about that before pouring it. But she hadn't, and he drank it, and nothing terrible happened. "It's bitter," he said. "Most people add something," Sally said, from behind the counter, in the tone of someone who has been having a separate conversation from a polite distance this whole time. He turned to look at her. "Cream," she offered, "sugar. We have local honey." A pause. "Local honey," he said. She brought it over, a small pot of it amber and thick from a farm 3 miles up the road. He looked at it, looked at her. She tilted it slightly, demonstrating. He added a small amount to his coffee and stirred it with the spoon she'd put down beside it. He tried it again. "Better," he said. "Isn't it?" Sally said, and went back to her counter with the particular satisfaction of someone who has just solved a problem they didn't know they had. Vera had been watching all of this. She had been watching her father navigate the space between his life and hers, and Vera is not someone who cries easily. She told us. She was not far from it. "Do you know," she said quietly, when his attention came back to her, "what it's like when you're the daughter of someone who closes worlds?" He was still. "Do you know," she said, "what it's like to grow up knowing that every planet we studied in school, every beautiful documented system in the academic archive, I was always checking whether it was on your list, checking whether it was still there." The gold light under his skin. Vera, I used to look at Earth specifically, she said. I found it in an unauthorized cultural cache someone at the Academy had compiled. Old broadcasts, music, radio signals they'd collected. I listened to them for a year before I ever filed anything. She looked down at her pancakes, which had gone cold. I don't know why Earth specifically. I think it was the music. He waited. There was a piece of music, she said. I can't tell you the name, I couldn't figure out the name from the file. But it was a low instrument, very low and a high one together, and it sounded like something that hurt and was beautiful at the same time, and I thought. She stopped, collected herself. I thought that any world that could make that sound shouldn't be cleared. The room was very quiet. Vera looked up at her father. So I came, she said, and I was right. Part 3, what a closing commander does when the math changes. Upstairs on the Meridian station, I had been watching the sensor feeds for 2 hours and 17 minutes. The fleet hadn't moved. 47 ships, hanging in space like a held breath. The Ethon Meridian at their center, dark and patient. Our defense grid was still active, still charged, still pointed at things we knew couldn't help us if it came to that. Sarathvel, the Galactic Authority liaison, had been making calls for hours and was now sitting in our break room. We'd given them the break room, which still had powdered donut residue on the floor, with the expression of someone who is very good at their job and is currently running out of options. Reyes hadn't slept. None of us had slept. The coffee machine had been running continuously since 6:14, and at this point I think we were all operating on about 80% anxiety and 20% caffeine, which is not an ideal ratio. At 7:41, the comm panel lit up. From the Ethon Meridian. Not on the general frequency. On the same specific channel they'd used the first time, the one addressed to our exact call sign. Reyes and I both reached for it at the same time. She got there first. Meridian Station, she said. A pause. Then Vale Koss's voice. And even through the translation algorithm, something in it was different. Something had shifted, not much, not in any way that was easy to name. But I'd spent 2 hours and 17 minutes listening to sensor data and watching a fleet wait and holding myself at a level of attention that left you hyper-aware of everything, and I heard it. He said, I need your database on Galactic Compact Provision 7, Exception Clause Subsection 4. I need it transmitted immediately. Reyes looked at me. I looked at her. We both understood what that meant. He was checking the law. He was checking it himself from his ship, which meant either he already knew what he was going to find and needed to confirm it on record, or he was running the numbers, and the numbers were coming out differently than he'd planned. Either way, he was checking the law instead of proceeding with the fleet. And that was everything. Transmitting now, Reyes said, and signaled me to pull the file. I pulled it and sent it before she finished the sentence. Another pause. Then there is a registered cultural exchange application for this system. Yes, Reyes said. Filed 6 months ago, fully documented. Witness verified. Yes. Under the name, and he said a Vethani phrase that our translator rendered as brightness through clouds. Vera's real name. Yes, Reyes said. The longest pause yet. The exception clause, he said finally, is valid. Reyes kept her voice completely even. We believe so. A silence that stretched for about 10 seconds. I will need to file a formal procedural hold with the Fleet Authority, he said. Provision 7 assessments can be suspended under Exception Clause 4 when cultural exchange documentation meets the threshold. The documentation in this case, another pause, meets the threshold. Reyes closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Understood, she said. The hold will take effect immediately. The fleet will maintain position pending formal review, which under Galactic Compact procedures will take no less than 40 standard cycles, a beat, during which time this system retains full protected status. 40 standard cycles, 40 years. Earth had 40 years. Understood, Reyes said again, and then after a moment in a tone that was completely professional and completely sincere. Commander Vale Koss, thank you. A long silence. I am following the law, he said. I know, she said. Thank you anyway. The channel closed. I looked at Reyes. She looked at me. Then she sat down in her chair, heavily, the way you sit down when your legs have been holding you up for reasons other than muscle. Someone, she said quietly, owes that kid a very good breakfast. Down in the diner, at approximately the same moment, something happened that none of us witnessed directly, but that several people described to us afterward. Vera's phone buzzed. She looked at it. It was a notification from a Vethani legal network, the kind of notification you only get when a filed document has been formally acted upon. She read it twice. Then she set the phone down on the table, and she put her face in her hands and she breathed. Maya put a hand on her arm. Vera. It's fine, Vera said from behind her hands. Her voice was steady. It's fine, it worked. James leaned forward. What worked? She lifted her head. Her pale silver eyes were bright in a way that wasn't just bioluminescence. The forms worked, she said. And across the table, Vale Koss was watching his daughter, and the gold light under his skin was visible and steady, and he wasn't suppressing it at all. He looked down at her plate, the pancakes cold now, still with the maple syrup pooled around them. Can I, he said carefully, try one of those? Vera stared at him. You want a pancake? You said they were sweet. I prefer, he glanced at Sally. I prefer the honey. Sally, who had been pretending very convincingly to wipe down the counter for the last 20 minutes, was already moving. Short stack for the commander, she called toward the kitchen. And bring the good maple syrup, the grade A dark and the local honey. From the kitchen, her cook, a quiet man named Pete who had heard the whole thing and processed it in the way he processed most things, which was to keep cooking, called back. You got it. Vale Koss looked at Sally. You were not concerned, he said. It wasn't quite a question. Sally thought about it. I was concerned, she said. I'm a reasonable person, but you came in and you sat down and you drank your coffee, and in my experience, she set down her cloth. People who sit down and drink their coffee aren't the ones you need to worry about. He considered this. That is, he said, not a tactically sound philosophy. Maybe not, she said, but it's a good one for running a diner. Something happened to his face, not quite a smile. The Vethani face doesn't move the same way, but something shifted, something in the set of it, like a window cracking open in a house that's been closed all winter. I think, he said slowly, that I have been running the wrong kind of establishment. Vera laughed. It was the first time any of us, well, Borvith, who was in the grocery store across the street and had his recording equipment running, because of course he did, had heard her laugh that morning. It was a real one. A Vethani laugh sounds a little different from a human one, slightly lower in register, slightly longer, but the quality of it is the same. The looseness, the relief. The gold light pulsed through both of them, father and daughter in the same rhythm. The pancakes arrived. Vale Koss looked at them for a long moment. Short stack, extra butter, real maple syrup, a small pot of local honey on the side. He picked up the fork, looked at it, adjusted his grip. The fork was small for his hand, but he managed. He cut a piece, added a small amount of honey, put it in his mouth. The diner waited. Frank and Dorothy, at their table, had completely abandoned any pretense of eating their own breakfast. The librarian, George, had not turned a page of his newspaper in 40 minutes. The construction workers were going to be late for work, and they hadn't moved. The teenage girl with the homework had stopped pretending to study. Vale Koss chewed slowly. Swallowed. He looked at the fork. He looked at Vera. I understand, he said, why you stayed. Vera pressed her lips together, nodded once, a small, controlled nod. I know you do, she said. He cut another piece. They stayed in that booth for 2 more hours. I know because Borvith's records are very thorough, and the security camera timestamp is clear. 2 hours. The breakfast crowd came and went. Ruth from the bookshop came in for her morning coffee at 9 and stopped dead in the doorway for approximately 3 seconds before walking straight over to the booth and introducing herself to Vale Koss with the matter-of-fact directness of a woman who has been putting difficult situations in their proper place her whole life. Carl, the elderly man with the steep driveway, came in at 9:30, and Vera introduced him to her father with the simple sentence, "This is Carl. Vera carries his groceries." And Vale Koss looked at Carl and said with complete seriousness, "She is strong. You should not struggle with this." And Carl said, "I appreciate that. and shook his hand and went to his usual table. At some point, Maya pulled out her phone and showed Vale Koss the photograph she'd taken of Vera playing guitar on the fire escape. Vera immediately tried to take the phone away, and Maya held it out of reach, and the expression on Vale Koss's face as he looked at the photograph. His daughter in the summer evening light, hunched over a guitar that was slightly too small for her, mouth open in concentration, was something Borvith's recording captured at close range, and I've watched it many times, and it never looks the same twice. He looked at it for a long time. "The instrument is improperly sized for her," he said finally. "I know," Maya said. "We're trying to find a bigger one. It's hard. They don't really make them in her size." "I will," he stopped, started again. "I will have one made." Maya looked at Vera. Vera was looking at her coffee. "You don't have to," she started. "I will have one made," he said again, with the finality of a military commander who has made a tactical decision. He left at 11:17. He walked back through Harwick Falls the way he'd come in, down the main street, past the hardware store and the post office, across the covered bridge, through the farmer's field, back to the shuttle. Bill Tanner was still doing something to his fence. He nodded at Vale Koss when he walked past. Vale Koss stopped. He looked at the man, at the fence, at the field, the clover catching the mid-morning light. "This land," he said, "it is yours." "My family's," Bill said, "4 generations." Vale Koss was quiet for a moment. "It is good land," he said. "It is," Bill agreed. And Vale Koss looked at it for a moment longer, the field, the mountains, the July sky, and then he walked to his shuttle and he left. The fleet began its withdrawal at 1340 hours. 47 ships, the Ethon Meridian at their center, turning and reconfiguring and then, one by one, folding into hyperspace transit. The sensor feeds showed them going, not quickly, but methodically, the way a fleet withdraws when it's following proper procedure rather than retreating in disorder. The last ship to go was the Ethon Meridian itself. It held position for a long moment after the others had gone. Long enough that we held our breath on the Meridian station, long enough that Reyes gripped the edge of her console. Then it too folded into hyperspace, and the sky above Earth was empty again. Just stars, just the ordinary dark, the way it had been before 6:14 on that Tuesday morning. Priya pushed her glasses up. The construction workers got in their truck and drove to their job site. George the librarian folded his newspaper and went back to the library and spent the day quietly cataloging the new arrivals, some of which were, as it happened, Galactic Authority cultural publications that the Authority had begun sending to libraries under the Cultural Exchange Program. He cataloged them the same way he cataloged everything, carefully, by category, with a small sticker on the spine. Sally put a piece of Vera's half-eaten short stack in a takeout box and put it in the refrigerator. When Vera came back 2 days later and found it there and asked why she'd kept it, Sally said she wasn't sure exactly, and that sometimes you hold on to something just because it was part of the day. Vera carried Carl's groceries that Thursday, as usual. She played guitar on the fire escape on the warm evenings. She kept her standing Tuesday and Thursday breakfast. 5 months later, a package arrived at the Harwick Falls post office, addressed to Vera Koss. It came through an official Galactic Authority freight channel, which meant it had import documentation and customs clearance, and a very confused post office employee who had to look up the procedure for accepting an alien freight transfer. Inside the package was a guitar. It had been made to exact specification, the right scale, the right proportions, the right weight for hands that were larger than any human luthier had designed for. The wood was not any wood you'd find on Earth. It was of Ethani material that had a slight warmth to its color, a deep amber red, and when you ran your hand across it, the grain felt like something old. The tuning pegs were set for human standard tuning, which meant someone had researched that specifically. There was no note. There didn't need to be. Vera stood in the post office for a while, holding the case. The post office employee asked if she was okay. She said yes. She said she was very okay. She sat on the fire escape that evening and played for 2 hours, and the people in the street below stopped what they were doing and listened. And someone said it sounded better than before, fuller, and someone else said yes. She'd gotten a new guitar, and someone else said where from, and the first person said they weren't entirely sure but that it was a good one. I want to tell you what I learned from all of this, because I spent a long time thinking about it. I learned that the most dangerous thing in the universe is not a fleet of 47 ships, or a commander who has dissolved 17 worlds. The most dangerous thing is a 15-year-old girl who does her paperwork 6 months in advance, and then goes to a small town in Vermont, and carries an old man's groceries, and learns to play guitar badly on a fire escape, and eats pancakes with local honey on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. Because all of that is proof. Proof that something is worth keeping. And proof is harder to argue with than any weapon. I also learned something about Veilkas. In the months that followed, as the formal review process moved through the Galactic Authority's procedural system, 40 standard cycles, which is 40 years, which is longer than I'll probably live but a starting point, he filed supplementary documentation of his own. Voluntary documentation, going above and beyond what the exception clause required. Cultural observations, formal assessments, written in the precise, clipped language of a Vethani military commander, of things he had witnessed during his approximately 4-hour visit to Earth. The farmer and his field, land held by family continuity across multiple generations, evidence of long-term investment in and care for local environment. The librarian, systematic preservation of knowledge across changing cultural conditions, low-resource, high-dedication model. The woman who ran the diner, adaptive social infrastructure serving as community cohesion point, exceptional at de-escalation through the use of coffee and honey. And at the end of the supplementary documentation, one final observation. Subject exhibits culture-wide tendency to remain present in difficult situations rather than withdrawing, noted across multiple individuals of varying age and status. Further study recommended. Personal note, appended outside formal assessment parameters. My daughter chose this world. She is not someone who chooses poorly. This is noted. Vera still lives in Harwick Falls. She's not 15 anymore, or the equivalent of it. She's older now. She's enrolled in a proper educational program, one of the joint Human Galactic Authority institutes that have opened in the years since everything changed. She commutes, which involves a kind of transit that I can't fully explain, but that apparently takes about 20 minutes from Vermont. She still has her booth at the diner, Tuesday and Thursday, 700. She still plays guitar on the fire escape. She still carries Carl's groceries, though Carl is older and the hill is steeper, and sometimes she carries Carl a little bit too, though she's tactful about how she phrases it. 3 times since that Tuesday, a certain Vethani command vessel has entered Earth's system on what the logs describe as a transit corridor passage. Each time, it has taken a trajectory that brings it, briefly, into visual range of Vermont. Each time, it transmits a single brief signal to the Galactic Authority's civilian relay station in Burlington, which is logged as a navigational check-in. The signal is always at 700 local time. The time when a girl and her friends are having pancakes in a diner on a main street, in a small town that almost wasn't there anymore. I think about that a lot. The 47 ships and the covered bridge, the battle weave armor and the local honey. The word cleared, said in a flat translator voice, and the word pancakes, said by a girl who had planned all of this from the moment she first heard a piece of music in an unauthorized cultural cache and felt something she couldn't name. I think about the gold light pulsing under a commander's skin as he sat in a booth that was too small for him and realized that his daughter had already done the only thing worth doing. She'd proven that something here was worth finding. I think the ending line should be this. The universe is enormous and very old and mostly cold, and it contains things that could end us without effort and barely a thought. But somewhere in it, a girl sat in a diner in Vermont with maple syrup on her plate and her father's name and a year's worth of paperwork, and she looked at 47 ships and she said, "Come and see what you'd be destroying." And he came, and he saw, and he stayed for pancakes.